episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
We are joined by none other than the father of biohacking himself, best-selling author, award-winning podcast host, serial entrepreneur, Dave Asprey, founder and chairman of Bulletproof 360, the high-performance coffee and food company, and creator of the widely popular Bulletproof Coffee, a Bulletproof Diet, collagen protein supplements, many other fascinating advances in commercial wellness products. He's a three-time New York Times bestselling author, host of Webby award-winning podcast Bulletproof Radio. He's been featured all over the place, the Today Show, Fox News, Nightline, CNN, and so forth. And over the last couple of decades, Dave has worked really hard with doctors, researchers, scientists, investors, to ultimately uncover the latest, most innovative methods, techniques, and products for enhancing both mental and physical performance. Dave has personally spent over $2 million of his own money taking control of his biology, pushing the bounds of possibility, all in the name of science, evolution, and he says revolution. Dave earned his undergraduate degrees in computer information systems at California State, and later his MBA from here in Philly at the Wharton School.
Happy to come on, and I've made it my mission to share this incredible body of knowledge that I'm really blessed to have had from now more than 800 interviews on Bulletproof Radio, and from 20 years of running an anti-aging group and having lost 100 pounds and made my brain work better and really have more energy now than I've ever had in my life, which is kind of cool. So in fact, just came out with my new book called Fast This Way, where of all the things that make a big difference that are easy to do, at this point, I have access to every piece of technology on the planet that can improve human performance. There might be some random things in Russia I don't know about, but really, I can do it all. The problem is I don't have enough time. And so, like, okay, how do you figure out what's going to do the most for you? And really, you look at sleep. We do it every night. If you do that a little bit better, you get higher returns. And then there's eating. And I can teach people exactly how to eat. I wrote a whole big book on that. People lost 1 million pounds on the Bulletproof diet, but a lot of people are like, I'm not going to do that. So the new book, which is at fastthisway.com, it's like, look, here's how timing of food affects things. And here's exactly the psychology of it. And so now really, for most of us, the thing that's holding us back is part biological. We don't make enough energy. And then it's part emotional and psychological, where we think we can't have more energy, or we think if we don't eat right now, we're going to die, therefore we eat the donut. So all of that's hackable. And it's really fun for me to be able to discover it and then also just to share it. So I'm spending a lot of my focus this year on teaching what I've written.
Outstanding. And it's really exciting to learn about your journey. Obviously, I've followed you for quite a while now, but for some of the folks that may be less familiar with sort of the Bulletproof story, could you take us for a few minutes on sort of that journey to Tibet, where a lot of this started off, where you first sort of came in contact with yak butter drinks and came up with the idea that, hey, there's something to these really interesting lipids and fatty acids that you want to exploit for everybody else.
I'd managed to lose most of the 100 pounds I wanted to lose, but I was also used to just feeling tired, hungry. I had arthritis in my knees when I was 14. I had serious brain fog in my mid-20s, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, high risk of stroke and heart attack, kind of the diseases of aging. And I'd gotten myself healthy enough that I could go to a remote part of Tibet called Mount Kailash. It takes 5 days in a 4-wheel drive just to get there. And this is the holiest mountain in the world, in that people of the Hindu faith or Buddhists believe this is kind of their Mount Olympus. This is where the gods live. So you go and you walk around it. If you do it once in your life, you'll become enlightened, or at least, have blessings or something. I read about it years ago. I was like, I just want to do this. And I was in the area, and the opportunity presented itself. So I went. Now, I've done altitude mountaineering in various continents. And when you're at 18,000 feet elevation, you feel like you're dying, kind of because you are, unless you're adapted to it. And you take about 30 pounds of air in every day, and you combine it with a much smaller amount of food. you mix them up. And if your body works right, you make electrons, and then those power your energy, and you either feel good or you feel bad. And, you can spend the energy on, good stuff, on repairing cells, or, sending good thoughts. You can spend it on watching reruns or on obsessing over the latest election or pandemic or whatever. Like, these are just electrons that go where you direct them or where your body directs them. But since you don't have enough, normally you feel like crap at high altitude. This little lady, I was feeling really rough, little Tibetan lady, like half my height, gives me a little bowl of yak butter tea. Yes, it's tea with yak butter in it. And they don't just put it in there, they blend it. And if they're wealthy, they would have a little electric blender. Otherwise, they would have a manual butter churn, and they would churn it. I'm like, guys, you don't have running water. Couldn't I just eat the butter and drink the tea? Like, no, do it this way. And it never made sense to me, but I drank that first one and I felt so amazing. I came back to Silicon Valley. I said, I'm going to buy me some butter and some tea, and I did that, and it tasted like crap and it didn't work. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I said, it must be the tea. And I spent $100 on high-end tea and it didn't change anything. So I said, it must be the butter. I can't get yak butter. So I tried 25 kinds of butter. Funny enough, butter from grass-fed cows works. Butter from cows that eat corn and soy and whatever other garbage they feed them, it doesn't work because it's the wrong fat. And if you don't blend it, it doesn't work. And what I did is I said, all right, I can try this with tea and I can try it with coffee. And I ended up coming out with Bulletproof Coffee, which is very precise. There's thousands of iterations of this. Most coffee, especially in the US, has mold toxins in it because it's illegal to sell coffee that has, you can't taste it. There's just very small amounts of very specific toxins that come from fermentation. So when Japan, China, and Europe won't drink it, they send it to the US and we drink it. I am not making this up. I have the former president of the Specialty Coffee Association on video talking about this problem, about how he was there in Japan when they ejected or rejected 1,000 containers, shipping containers of coffee beans that were too moldy for Japan. I'm like, what'd you do? He goes, oh, we sent them to the US. Right. So I'm like, you got to have coffee that doesn't make you crash because of mold toxins, doesn't make you jittery. You put butter from grass-fed cows into the coffee and you add another oil called MCT oil, which is now a very popular category that I created. There's different ways of making MCT, and I'll say the Bulletproof stuff is the best. But you blend all that up and you drink it and clarity happens. And it's funny because it's the kind of clarity that comes from a fast. If you fast for about 3 days, usually your body will turn on something called ketones, which is when you go into fat burning mode. And the reason you get clarity from fasting is that the neurons in your brain, even if there's sugar present, they will use ketones because ketones have more electrons available. So the most powerful part of your brain needs that extra octane boost. That's why brain octane is the name of my MCT oil, right? So when you do this, all of a sudden you're like, man, I got this. The problem is that you have to feel like crap for 2 or 3 days when you start a fast, unless you're using Bulletproof Coffee. It's one of several different hacks to turn off hunger during a fast that's in the new book. So fast this way. I will say, guys, you want to order your copy now because I'll actually take you through 2 weeks of learning how to do intermittent fasting. There's a whole fasting challenge that I'm doing for free for people who buy the book and send me the receipt. Go to fastthisway.com for all the details. And what happens there is like, whoa, the first day, instead of being hungry and cold and tired, you're like, I feel better than I did before and I'm not hungry. And what I always did is I say, all right, I'm in Silicon Valley, computer hacker. I'm going to sit in this meeting and they're going to put a plate of cookies there. And today I'm not going to have the cookie. Right. And then the cookie's like, Dave, eat me. No. Eat me. No. And pretty soon it's like a 2-year-old. It pesters you, but this is the voice in your head. This is the mitochondria in your body saying there might be a famine. We want more electrons, eat the cookie. And eventually you're going to eat half the cookie. And then later be like, why am I such a failure? I couldn't even say no. Well, the reason you couldn't say no is the part of your body that wanted the cookie. It wasn't you. It controls how much energy you have, and it'll just keep on hijacking your brain more and more. The fasting training, the knowledge that's in Fast This Way, it's really interesting because if you can turn off that voice, fasting isn't difficult anymore, right? And there's different ways to do it. But when you turn off that voice, you look at the cookie and no one's asking you to eat it. You actually don't want the cookie. Like someone could say, no, really, please take a bite. And you're like, actually, I'm truly not hungry. And no willpower required. I found a study in Fast This Way. I wrote about it. Up to 30% of the thoughts most people have every day is about what's in their next meal. So you're sitting there and you're meditating, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to meditate. It's like pizza. Like, what? No, that's not how it's supposed to be. Or you're at work. You're saying, all right, I'm going to create this really good thing. Or you're like me, you write New York Times bestsellers and stuff. And if all I'm doing is thinking about food, or even for just a third of my thoughts, that is wasted energy. And you can turn that off. And the body believes truly that if you don't eat everything that's available until you're stuffed, a famine could come tomorrow and you'll die. And it's anxiety. It's a feeling that you're going to die. And part of this is not you dying, it's your mitochondria dying. There's a quadrillion of these ancient bacteria embedded in your cells, and they're the ones driving the cravings. Here's what happens. The mitochondria that are so weak, they can't go a few hours without food. Well, they're lazy, and they're like, we don't want to die. You have to eat. And you're like, sorry, guys, I'm in charge. I'm not going to eat. And what happens is amazing. The weak ones die, and they get replaced by young, strong ones who can fast. And that's why a regular practice doesn't have to be every day. It can be 3 days a week. In fact, for women, there's a whole chapter in Fast This Way about how women might want to modify their fasting, because over fasting, just like overtraining, it's not good for you. But doing it some of the time without pain makes your body grow younger, more powerful mitochondria. And it's really amazing how quickly that kicks in. And I'm really blessed in that hunger is not a major part of my life. And I'm around 10, 11% body fat right now. I exercise very moderately. I do high ROI exercise, in that I do high ROI everything, return on investment. I want to spend the minimum amount of time necessary. But to be able to do that, and I'm just turned 48. So it's pretty interesting. Metabolically healthier now than I was in my 20s. And it's because of these practices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Along the lines of the mold toxins and a lot of the work that you did there when you were developing the coffee, and obviously realizing that there's toxins that can make you foggy or make you feel weak. I was just interested, and I haven't read the new book yet, but we've discussed on other episodes of this show sort of beneficial components of our microbiome. We've touched on the virome a little bit. Did you touch on any microbiome related stuff in the new book? And then I was, just thinking of, once again, fungus and mold and so forth. Any interesting findings related to what sort of the microbiota, things that you've looked at this area a lot over the past several years?
I've written a lot about mold toxins, both in the environment and in our food. In part because one of the reasons I had chronic fatigue syndrome, in fact, most people with chronic fatigue syndrome and most people with Lyme disease actually have toxic molds. Yeah. So I also had Lyme disease. Lyme disease is real. It's just you don't get it and it doesn't stick around unless you also lived in a moldy building or got a big exposure to toxic mold. And toxic mold comes in our environment from basically damaged buildings or being in places where there's water and bad species growing. And it comes in food from field toxins. This is stuff that grows on the plants while they're growing. And mold it's just antibiotics. It's their job to say anything that eats my cheese is going to die, so they won't eat my cheese. It's really straightforward. We are bacterial-based beings. That's the mitochondria. There's an ancient war between mold and bacteria over who gets to eat the cheese. So they're putting poisons out there to keep us from doing it. And if you are exposed to these things, whether they're storage toxins, stuff that grew on the food after it was picked, or they're field toxins, or you're breathing it, it slows down energy production in the body, and it leads directly to diabetes, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. And to the point, I did a documentary called moldymovie.com. It's free. And people thought I was nuts. I lived in a house with Stachybotrys, one of the worst toxic molds. And no one knew it at the time, but it really messes with your brain, your ability to have emotional regulation with your hormones. A lot of the mold toxins are xenoestrogens, 1,000 times stronger than estrogen. So I'm like, why do I have stretch marks and man boobs? Well, thank you, mold. This really happens. And it's so common. 100 million buildings in the US have toxic mold, according to the experts I interviewed. The problem is that now with COVID, that place that was closed up for 3 months, now it has mold too. So the problem just got much worse, to the point I started a company called Homebiotic that makes a bacteria from soil that eats mycotoxins. So you're like, they're fighting bacteria. I'm like, I'm going to use these bacteria to fight back. And it's a very cheap product, and it's something you can just mist around a place so that you don't get that problem. And when you look at fasting and you look at the effect of mold in the gut or fungus in the gut, it's a big deal. And it's not very well studied. There's a few companies like Viome who have looked at that. And has Naveen Jain been on, the founder of Biome?
Yeah, a couple months ago.
He was? Okay, cool. So I'm one of the earliest advisors to Biome. And this is a company that can tell you, do you have fungus in the gut?
Sure.
And when you fast, interesting things happen in the gut. And if you have yeast or a fungus, or even just bad bacteria, all of us have some bad bacteria, some of us more than others, based on how much sugar and antibiotics and other chemicals we eat and things like that. At first, you get an increase in something called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. And lipopolysaccharides drive inflammation in the body, and they make you feel like crap. So you say, I'm going to fast, and I have a wrecked gut. And you just get these intense cravings, like, oh, I just don't feel good. And what's going on is the bacteria, like, we're stressed, therefore there's a threat, therefore have a big load of toxins that crosses the gut barrier, enters the brain, and you feel like a zombie. That's one of the reasons fasting is very hard to do, unless you take some of the supplements that I talk about during a fast, like activated charcoal. Activated charcoal binds to lipopolysaccharide in the gut, and then you don't get the pain that was going to come with the fast. So the real strong cravings and feeling like, like I'm going to die if I don't eat. Sometimes it's a toxin that's affecting it, and sometimes it's just mitochondrial weakness. So I do write about that. Although some of my other books, I've gone deeper into the gut biome. Another thing that can happen is that your gut bacteria can make histamine. So sometimes people eat foods and then they get a really strong histamine response, or they have soy sauce, which is full of it, or fermented fish or fermented soy. And then, God, why am I really tired? I've heard of people talk about a pork coma. They eat pork and afterwards like, I just need a nap. Well, what happened is take half a Benadryl to block the histamine and you don't need a nap. What's going on there is it's bacterial breakdown of foods, or it's gut bacteria doing that. So fasting can allow a big shift in your gut bacteria so that a lot of them clear out, the bad ones, and you can actually feed the good ones. One of the other big innovations in fasting that I cover in Fast This Way is, what can you use during a fast that allows you to maintain the process of fasting metabolically, but give you other benefits, including no hunger? And prebiotic fiber is a huge part of this. You can, during some types of fasting, take a prebiotic fiber in water, in coffee, and tea. And when you do that, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm not hungry at all. And what you did is you fed the good guys, and then they crowd out the bad guys during a fast. And the bacteria will actually take this fiber, which doesn't change your blood sugar. Your body can't actually use the fiber. The bacteria eat the fiber, and they make things like butyric acid and propionic acid, which are ketogenic and are good for you. So you could do fasting the old way. I'm just going to have water. And then what ends up happening is you pay for it, and you can just force your way through it. Or you can use the fasting hacks that I've identified that are backed by science and studies and all that. Studies are in the book, and say, if I do this, magically, I don't suffer. And fasting is not about suffering. It's actually about improving your health and improving your metabolism and your cognitive function. And it's possible. You just got to navigate it the right way. And that's why I decided I'd write a whole book about it.
Excellent. Dave, you mentioned early on some of the connections. We don't usually think about them, to things like mental effects on our biology, but also sort of the chronobiological dynamic of, if I eat at 8 p.m. versus 3 p.m. and so forth. When you look at Upgrade Labs, which is this fascinating biohacking facility that you've put together, you've really done something that I haven't seen anyone else do. And, aside from looking, as we've been discussing a lot of sort of the biochemical, sort of cellular side of things, you've brought together a bunch of tools, which I'll put in sort of this biophysical domain, where you look at things like atmospheric pressure, temperature, infrared light, electromagnetism. Talk a little bit about sort of how you went about studying a range of these biophysical tools as part of sort of the biohacking equation. Because we think a lot of the biohacking that we see is just more, thinking about everything between the nucleus of the cell and the cell wall. You've gone a bit beyond, because there's a lot more, obviously, that affects our body than just what's there. So take us on a little bit of that journey, if you would.
Well, I was looking for a name that would allow me to pull together these amazing anti-aging researchers that I'd worked with for years, running an anti-aging nonprofit group outside Stanford University in Palo Alto. And I realized that we needed a community that would get neuroscientists talking to gut doctors, talking to world champion athletes, talking to Navy SEALs and astronauts, and all these different domains where we're all seeking something that every human wants, and is control of our own biology. And having been steeped even in the early days in epigenetics and this idea that, you know, the environment controls your genes are not your destiny, and having really taken a seriously broken brain with in imaging big holes in metabolic activity as a result of mold toxins and other metabolic problems, and fixed all of that, said, all right, there's got to be something. And so I carefully crafted the definition of biohacking. It's the art and science of changing the environment around you and inside of you so that you have full control of your own biology. And they didn't use exactly my definition, but in 2018, Merriam-Webster's added biohacking as one of 800 something new words in the English language. And my name's actually in the dictionary, which is super cool. Didn't expect that to happen. And what that led me down was, okay, what are the environmental variables that I can control? And it's pretty straightforward. Let's see, temperature, light, vibration, EMFs, food availability, other stressors. Those are all out there, even weightlifting, something like that. Well, there's a signal you can get into the body. And historically, we could eat whatever was available or not eat. We could run away from a tiger, or we could pick up rocks. Oh, and we could build a fire to be warm. That was it. You know, we could do breathing exercises too, I suppose. Well, now my company, True Light, makes light therapy devices. And we make these awesome glasses, which I should have sitting in front of me, that you can use during the day to improve cognitive function by reducing eye strain. And you can use a different set at night that go way beyond blue blockers, which actually can be harmful during the day. Sure. And these are called True Dark glasses. Well, it's carefully filtering out some frequencies of light while allowing others. And you're tricking the body into believing it's totally dark. You can't do that as a caveman, but you can do it as a modern human. And at Upgrade Labs, I said, all right, let's go all the way. What can we do? And we can now replace 45 minutes of cardio with 2 20-second intervals over 7 minutes, and no sweat required, with better cardiovascular outcomes than you get from 45 minutes of sweating. Okay, that's awesome. And so we're just using science to say, what are these things that we know the body responds to, and how do we get a signal from the environment in? And that's led Upgrade Labs to have a facility at the Beverly Hilton in Beverly Hills and in Santa Monica, where, you know, people that you've heard of, celebrity types come in, and a lot of people you've never heard of come in, and they're saying, I get more recovery here. I get more of a signal in, whether it's to build muscle, to build cardiovascular, or most often it's to recover from all the other stuff they're doing. And the results in my own life have been profound. I'm upstairs from $1 million worth of equipment like this. And I have this at home because I wanted to test it all out. And this is the material that goes into my books. And then I said, I really want others to experience this, because if you're right now spending 19 hours a week on meditating and exercising and doing all sorts of other stuff in ways that are less effective than they could be, you're actually wasting your life. If you could have got the same results and had 10 extra hours free that you could use to be with your kids, to do your craft, to do your job, to provide, to be a good community member, we've got to start paying attention to where do we put our energies. So that's what Upgrade Labs is all about. And it's to the point where if people go to the Upgrade Labs website, there's lots of info on it. And I'm actually looking at how to do a national rollout of it right now. So I'm looking to have this in every city, and you can reach out on the website if you're interested in participating in that.
Absolutely. Bring it to Philly.
Yeah,
definitely. You mentioned coming to neurotech and neuro enhancement. Obviously, you mentioned getting rid of the toxins, the proper diet. You're very hot on sleep technologies nowadays. Any other interesting things you're doing in sort of the neurotech, neuro-optimization space, not just to make me clearer, but increase my IQ, make me more Einsteinish, things of that nature?
Back in around 1997, when I had ADD and Asperger's and all that, I said, I've heard of this neurofeedback thing. And there was one guy doing it in Silicon Valley, a chiropractor. So I went and I walk into the waiting room, And there's this kid, maybe 8, 10 years old, and he looks up at me and he just starts screaming like, ah, it just runs in a circle around me like 30 times screaming. And I'm like, this sucks. And I go back and I'm doing this very primitive neurofeedback, and it's just, 1 hour sessions once a week. But 6 weeks later, I come back and the same kid's in the waiting room, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to wait in the car. Right. But I walk in and he looks at me and goes, hi, my name's Bobby. And it's like a totally different kid. I'm like, wow, look at what happened in just 6 weeks of training his brain. And I did get some results, mostly just awareness of when my brain was kind of going in the wrong direction from that. So I went and I bought my own neurofeedback machine, and I've had a variety of things that look at the brain waves and show them to you and let you change them for the last 20 something years. But what I soon realized was that doing brain surgery on yourself is kind of dumb. And some of the stuff that's most effective requires a third party, because you will not know what's going on there. Eventually, it led me to start a clinic called 40 Years of Zen, where people come and spend 5 days. And we've got a couple neuroscientists. We made our own hardware and software. We're using 6 different interventions. There's custom food, custom supplements, everything you can do in 5 days to put the brain in the same state that you would have achieved from decades of meditation. And right now, 90% of people report having a transcendent experience while they're upgrading their intelligence, while they're basically lowering the amount of energy the brain spends on useless behaviors. And then we're changing neuron firing speed, changing voltage in the brain. And people walk out of there going, wow, I didn't know that I had all this available energy when I was done. It's because we turn off some of that. And funny enough, and that is an intense program, and it's at a dedicated facility. It's a very substantial personal development thing. We've had billionaires and very famous people come through it, and we've had a bunch of people, again, you probably haven't heard of, but it makes it very consistently makes a very big difference in life because of that. And I believe that there's a great future for neurofeedback. We're just so focused on fixing broken stuff in most of the world. That's not what we're trying to do. I'm taking people in and saying, how do we take what you've got and make it way more effective? And so the brain states that you train are different, the areas of the brain, and the frequencies are different. And there's a personal development process that goes along with it. And I would just say, if you were to go do traditional meditation, and I've been to Tibet to learn meditation from the masters, that's why I was there. And you sit there and, you're in a monastery, your eyes are closed or open or whatever you're supposed to be doing. And if you get it right, and the person teaching is good, and their attention is on you, and you hit a new level, they might like raise an eyebrow or, tap you on the shoulder, whatever. That kind of feedback is really slow. But if you're getting 1,000 times a second, and as soon as you stop doing it right, you stop hearing things, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I can make more progress faster. And it's the same thing with sleep. It's not neurofeedback based, but I have this ring. I'm an investor, early advisor in Aura. And I was a CTO and co-founder of the first company to get heart rate from the wrist. We sold that company to Intel. So I've spent a lot of time since 2003 working on human signals coming off the body and how can we use those. But same thing. Eventually you might learn, I think last night was a pretty good night's worth of sleep because I don't remember waking up. You also might be waking up 10 times a night you don't remember. Right. So getting the data every morning, you wake up and look and go, what I do last night? What are the levers and the knobs? What's the control system? We don't have manuals, and we don't have very much other than what's going on in our body. We just don't have a way to map it. So what you used to do historically is wherever you were from, you'd talk to the crazy, unusual, medicine people or the religious people in the monastery or whatever, and they'd have best practices. So they would take a percentage of the population and say, you guys go live in a teepee, or go live in a cave, or go live in a monastery, and write down everything you know and hand it down to the next generation. We'll just do that for a couple thousand years, and pretty soon we're going to get something. It's a little bit faster now, and is such an amazing time to be alive, because you can literally do what would have taken lifetimes if you had multiple lifetimes to do, and you can do it in one lifetime now. But you got to eat the right way. You have to have a strong metabolism that can make enough energy to create change in your brain. And so for me, I spent 4 months of my life with the electrodes hooked up to my head. I still actively do neurofeedback, and it's so much more effective on a per hour basis than meditation. But I also like meditation, and I still meditate. It's just way better meditation than it was because now my brain is trained.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Dave, moving forward now, obviously, you're well known for wanting to get to 180. I've seen some stuff where you've experiment, I think, with continual glucose monitoring, things of this nature. Obviously we do a lot of the transhuman domain on the show. Any other interesting stuff on the, you started as an IT guy. Any interesting technologies in terms of sort of this transhuman dynamic, Ray Kurzweilian type interests that you may be looking at, maybe not now, but 2030 and beyond?
Well, there's a company called Levels Health that does continuous glucose monitoring. I just made an investment as an angel investor. I invest in BioHacking and companies like that into them because I've been doing continuous glucose monitoring for about 3 years on and off before Levels existed. And before that, I would prick my fingers when I was testing the Bulletproof diet and things like that to get a blood sample, which is not fun. And the Levels app actually taught me a lot because it's incorporated real-time feedback. So you take a picture of your food and then you can look at, oh, wow, if I eat that, I'd see this. So it's been very educational, even for me. I'm pretty good at knowing what food does. But there were some nuances that I was able to tease out. So continuous glucose monitoring for anyone who wants to lose weight, it's going to help in a very meaningful way. On the transhumanism front, it's really interesting. There's a group of people who say, transhumanism is inherently evil. And I am not one of those. What I believe about transhumanism is that it's fascinating, but we've already done that. The first time that a caveman ran out of his cave. This is from one of my other books. I talk about this, or actually, this is from one of my other books, my anti-aging book. He comes out of his cave and goes to the next cave in winter and says, hey man, I have this thing called fire, right? I saw it after lightning. I put it in my cave and no one died and my family's all warm and toasty, right? And the other caveman's like, well, that might be harmful. And it's not fair because what if everyone doesn't have fire? And so no thanks, I'll just do it the way I've always done it. And then the other caveman goes back to his cave. It's like, whatever. Well, one of those two cavemen became our ancestor, the one that had fire, which was technology that saves time and energy for people. No one knows about the great baking powder wars. Do you know about those?
No.
Well, unless you studied the history of consumer packaged goods, you wouldn't. But way back in the day, women lost 2 hours of sleep because I had to wake up early to knead the bread. And in the early 1900s, when baking powder was invented, there were giant commercial campaigns, and I call them wars, but it was very aggressive to say this amazing labor-saving invention called baking powder was changing people's lives, right? But for commercial control of that, we had some serious clapper girl, underhanded behavior kind of stuff. So those are transhumanism technologies. Blankets are transhumanism. Anything that we use to get control of our environment or ourselves is transhuman. And the fact that we're so much better at it, that's cool. Where transhumanism gets to be a little bit scary is, okay, I mentioned I was a computer hacker, studied computer information systems and all that. I was also a cyberpunk. I had my mirrored sunglasses and all that. And you look at guys like Neil Stephenson and William Gibson writing about, the dark cyberpunk future. Well, I was a cyberpunk, and if you control the technology that you're using for yourself, that's awesome. If someone else controls it, that's evil. So transhumanism is not inherently good or evil. It's about who has control of you. And if you have control of yourself, that's awesome. By the way, what did hackers do in the history of the internet? They built Linux because they didn't like it that Microsoft wouldn't show them the source code. Okay. Why did I call this movement biohacking instead of something else? Because it's up to us to know all of these environmental things that are controlling us, whether it's gut bacteria, whether it's time you eat, whether it's media exposure or the light frequency of the LED light that's making you tired. Well, if you know that those variables matter, you will know when another bad actor is using them against you, and you can choose to use them for you. So it's not about technology being evil. It's about who controls the technology. And I believe it's important that we have access to our own data and that we control our own data. And when you do that, you end up with some really, really interesting possibilities like, Viome and things like that, where you actually, okay, here's what's going on in my gut. I couldn't see it before. Now I can. And that's good. The side of transhumanism where I'm going to upload myself to the internet, there's a side of people who believe that we are meat robots. And that is not my experience of being a human. We have a transcendent part of what we do and what we are. I do not believe that our consciousness is all local. In fact, there's pretty good evidence that it's not just in the brain. So cutting off your head and freezing your brain in the hope that you'll somehow be resurrected, I'm just wondering if, 2,000 years from now, they'll be like, yeah, we found another cache of human heads. Because that's not going to work. You are every signal from every mitochondria throughout your body and a bunch of other stuff all coming together in a very complex network. And I say that, I kind of studied complex networks in artificial intelligence, and you can actually tease out the algorithm that drives the ego if you want to. So when you look at new transhumanism technologies, I want to scan my brain. I want a copy as close as I can get to me that runs on my computer and does stuff for me so I can be lazy. Because strategic laziness is what drives everything, right? We want to use less energy and we want to do more of what we want to do. And the minimum amount of energy doing what we don't want to do. Shocking, right? But that's really what transhumanism is. And stuff like, will we create a hive mind or have an AI overlord? Given the shit show that is 2020, maybe an AI overlord would be better.
Good point. Very good points. Coming back to you, we typically we ask a wrap-up question just about sort of important influencers and mentors from your past or currently. Obviously, you've met thousands of world-renowned folks, clinicians, scientists, investors. Any specific folks you want to shout out to, mention that have been along with you on the ride?
Man, there's so many people. I'm going to call out John Gray from Mars and Venus. Women are from Mars, men are from Venus, or maybe the other way around. I forget. I get all confused what planet I'm supposed to be from. I think it's the other way around. Anyway, if you look at his work on hormones and things like that, it is really profound. I included some of that in a couple of my books, actually. So he's one of these guys who's been at it for decades. And Jack Canfield is another one, Chicken Soup for the Soul. You're like, what? Those are like soft personal development books. I know Jack. I know John. I spend time with them. And there's a whole network of people who have spent decades working on improving human consciousness, who get together and meet. And I'm blessed to be able to do that. And then on the more even other kind of out there stuff, Dr. Barry Morguelan, who runs Energy for Success. He's one of 9 living grandmasters of a 5,000-year-old Chinese medicine tradition. And he's a UCLA surgeon, right? And the movie Doctor Strange, they interviewed him because he's the surgeon who went in the 80s to a remote monastery and knocked on the door and didn't get let in, like crazy stuff like that. So Barry, these are the things that are like acupuncture. 25 years ago, if you did acupuncture, you were just stupid because everyone knows it doesn't work, at least in the West. And now we're like, oh yeah, it turns out it does work. And we can actually measure these invisible meridians that we all thought didn't exist until we had good enough tools to measure them. It turns out we were wrong. And we're finding out that there's a lot of esoteric ancient knowledge that is being proven every single day. In fact, we see stuff like that at 40 years of Zen in neurofeedback. Oh, funny, people who report this have this kind of brainwave that's unusual. Who would have thought, right? So we're teasing all this stuff out, and I'm pretty excited about that future. And so Barry's been a great influence. And then on the business side, there's guys like Jay Abraham, who's a dear friend, and he's also helped 10,000 companies. He has this amazing body of knowledge about how to run a company and how to market. People like Joe Polish also runs Genius Network. And what you'll notice there, and then there's Steve Folks on the biochemistry side, wrote Smart Drug News way back in the 80s, and a brilliant biochemist, an advisor, and a mentor who taught me when I was really sick, hey, here's how to think about it, like in the right way. So you go back and you look at all these and you say, wow, there isn't really a theme there, except there is one theme. All of these people are masters of what they do. And most of them are 20 or 30 years older than I am, right? And call me middle-aged. So learning from your elders is the fastest and best way you can learn. And the reason I'm so interested in fasting, the reason I've written that book about how to live to at least 180 is I'm envisioning a world where our elders don't have Alzheimer's disease and have enough energy that they are at that point where they've developed wisdom and they have enough energy and desire to give back. And we take our older people and instead of kind of putting them in facilities where they forget their name, they're active members of society saying, you know what? 40 years ago, the government tried the same kind of shit show and we're not going to let it happen this time because we already know this thing because we've seen it. Right. And this is why we need our older people to be highly functional, highly focused, giving back. This is what grandparents are for. This is what elders are for. And so I've learned the most from people way older than me because they have more experience than me. And so I'll just call it out. You learn from your elders.
Excellent point and wonderful message. 100% on the same page with that. Dave, it's been quite inspiring and really wishing you the best with everything moving forward. I can't wait to see what else you're going to be coming out with in the years that follow. For everybody that's going to be watching this particular episode on the YouTube channel or listening on the various podcast networks, you've been listening to Dave Asprey, founder and chairman of Bulletproof 360, the father of biohacking. Pick up his books, his consumer products, listen to his podcast. Dave, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while.
I appreciate it, Ira. And I would encourage you, if you're listening to this, go to fastthisway.com. Send me a copy of your receipt, and I will spend 2 weeks with you teaching you the book. Because it's not enough to write a book anymore. For all of the books I've written, I'm actually putting together courses to teach people because I just realized I was doing a poor job as a leader where I'd spend thousands of hours writing a book and expect you to read it. So now I'm literally putting hundreds of hours of content together to teach people what's in the books because we don't all learn just from reading. And I feel like that's a big part of my mission for 2021, just to make that information so you can use it. And it's a great honor to be able to share that info on your show today, Ira.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff, Dave. Thanks so much.